So a lot of research has already been done about what factors drive a mature people analytic practice. But it's a little bit strange that nobody defined what is a mature people analytic practice. So I talked to 15 larger organizations across the globe and had a conversation with them. If people analytics is institutionalized in an organization, what proof do you see? What characteristics do you see? Today, we talked a lot about the letter C, I think. What was the letter? What did it stand for this morning? Customer? Courage? Connection? And there are so many more letters in the alphabet, right? So I want to talk about the letter D. Sorry. Well, also data and decision making. Right? So why wouldn't you do the utmost as an organization based on data to try to understand your employees? And a lot of organizations immediately ask the question, if you look too much at data or people data, where is the human in there, right? Where is it still human-centric? But a lot of those data points, they reflect at scale the ambitions, the anxieties, the emotions that people have. So to really do the utmost as an organization to understand that, for me, is a good example of exactly that. It is human-centric. Of course, you can use it in the wrong way, but I think in essence, looking at people data is a very human-centric way of trying to understand your workforce and trying to make them improve in development, do succession management, do recruitment, do onboarding, do whatever you do within your organization in a much better grounded way. At the same time, I don't think that decision-making is only analytics, of course. Experience, intuition is also in the equation, but if you miss one of the three, I guess you're lagging behind, right? So that was my pitch for evidence-based HR, very important. So I worked for decades at ABN AMRO. I think my 3 colleagues left. There were 3 here. I wanted to do a fist bump, but not possible anymore. And I started in IT, went to HR, did a lot of different things, was part of the management team, and then I was the global head of people analytics for 10 years. And after those 10 years, I transitioned to Kennedy Fitch, a small boutique company, and Tilburg University is also on here. It's not to brag, but it's, well, the PhD candidacy. But why is it important? It's on the adoption of people analytics in organizations. So why do some succeed and why do some fail or have a slower maturity curve in people analytics? That's what I'm investigating. So today I'm going to blend those 2 views. I'm going to be grounded a lot in my practitioner knowledge that I have in the last 10, 12 years, but I will merge it a little bit with academic work. So I hope you appreciate that. A 2-parter. First one, I'm going to show you 6 views of evidence-based HR. So 6 pictures that I think are important to understand, and hopefully it inspires you to apply that in your own organization, right? Second part is on the research I'm doing. A little bit on my first paper, and my second paper, I will explain it later, but that's on the adoption part. Questions so far? No. Let's keep it interactive. If you have a question, please do. Please ask, no problem. So here we go. Practitioner best practices. Like I said, 6 pictures that I want to talk about. And all those views should help you, well, get more grounded in what's happening in your organization based on data and based on logic, and drive your HR interventions that you do, or your people strategy. So let's go to the first one. We call it the bigger picture, the cross. And who is currently writing a people strategy or adopting their people strategy? By showing hands. 1, 2, 3, right? Who is determining where to put their HR interventions or where to invest in? couple others. And I think, and of course for all your organizations that is not true, but for many organizations, when you look at the people strategy and you look what is in there, it's very much the upper arrow, so the voice of the talent market. It talks about hybrid working, artificial intelligence, facilitating leadership, whatever you want to call it. All those trends are typically very much in those people strategies. What I often miss in the hundreds of organizations that I saw in the last 3-4 years, and also in the research, the voice of the business and the voice of the employee are less articulated in those people strategies. So what is really the burning platform in your business? What do employees express as their ambitions, needs, or anxieties, or emotions? And how can you leverage that and bring that in your strategy? So we have 3 arrows that construct your people strategy and your HR interventions. The left part, what capability is related to the voice of the business? How can you find the voice of the business in your organization? What do you need to do? There's no wrong answer. Well, there is. Any thoughts? Talk to your leaders, right? So what typical capability in HR is that attached to? Business partners, and what do they do? Strategic workforce management. I have to spell it out. Strategic workforce management, right? Talking to your leaders via your HR business partners and having a through and really understanding on what is happening in a business line or in the business at large. The other arrow, voice of the employee, what are organizations doing more and more? That's, I guess, closer to home here. Continuous employee listening, right? Surveys, everything we do to try to understand the employees. So let's take the first one. View 2, right? So that was the bigger picture. This is strategic workforce management. Who is doing something like this? These are the steps where you understand your business, try to be very specific about if we're going to go for this strategy, what does the organization needs to be good at? That is step 2, determining organizational capabilities. Then identify the gap on your workforce, you start to do interventions and you start evaluating. Who is doing this in a sort of a structured way? I think half of you. Good, excellent. What we see is that this one is the biggest gap and the biggest difficulty in most organizations. Even businesses itself are not always very specific on, okay, do we need to be good in marketing and sales or in operational excellence or within banking mortgages or whatever we want to be good at to thrive that business strategy. But it's so important to scope your strategic workforce management effort. Many, many times, business came to me and said, okay, let's do strategic workforce management. Give me an overview of everything that's happening in my workforce and we can have a discussion. First 2 times I said, okay, let's do it. And the 3rd time I started to push back. That is not strategic workforce management, right? That's reporting. I'm going to report on everything, and you're going to look at it and maybe see something that is an outlier, and let's talk about that. No, I want to talk with you about the strategy of your business, your key organizational capabilities, and what skills, leadership, organizational design, culture, what do you need to make that capability more mature and more successful, and eventually also your strategy. But that step is often skipped. Is that recognizable? Yeah? See some people nodding? And in many cases, HR also doesn't have the mandate to have these discussions. That depends on the organization, right? Sure.
I'm kind of thinking, what have you been doing for the last 20 years running this business? If you can't tell me what your org capabilities are, the crucial, critical things that make you work, you can't define them unless you look down the line at some competency profile we've provided. I find I'm aghast at that.
Yeah.
It's like you don't know what your secret sauce is.
No, but in this case, it's related to a strategy, new strategy. They articulate a new strategy. Let's go to a new market, new customers, new products. Yeah. That's completely different in terms of capabilities than same country, some new clients, same products, right? Yeah. Then the things you need to do are completely different. Yeah. And thinking about that is extremely important. But yeah, I agree. It is mind-blowing, but well, it's a little bit black and white, that not many organizations are very specific on those organizational capabilities. And as HR, you need to have them, right? You need to have a scoped and conscious discussion on how you can help from a workforce perspective. So typically, with strategic workforce management, I can do this. We talk about the business and we say, okay, let's go to the gaps. Skill gaps, I don't know, more FTE, maybe OD even if we're very creative, and let's do some interventions. But this step, for me, is important and still missing. And then evaluating, of course, very important. And that's where also people analytics comes in. You can check if your HR interventions, with the intention to make those organizational capabilities more mature, if they are effective or not. Who is checking on effectiveness of larger interventions they do? Only a few, and with hesitance. It's very doable. It's not difficult at all, right? You need to track and trace who's doing what, and typically you do it with treatment, non-treatment group, like in medicine, right? And you can see if people actually learn what they intend to learn because of going to that intervention or not. And that's important information, right? If you invest a lot in these interventions, it's a simple exercise your people analytics team could do. So I call this also the one HR process. Everybody's involved, right? All the domain owners, recruitment, onboarding, you can name them all. They are here, right? They are here trying to come up with workforce interventions to support closing the gaps. Sometimes this dies in perfection, these exercises. This is strategy, so it's about direction, not precision. So maybe a little bit of a lame example, or how do you call it, a cliche, but when you talk to finance, they can talk to you about, okay, you're going to grow not with 1,200 people, but with 1,156. I don't care. I don't care. From a strategic point of view, I don't. And they will point out to you, and again, hopefully no finance people here. I could use any other role. But they challenge the reports on FTE and headcount. But that's not what you want to talk about here, right? It's directional. And another thing that is sometimes in the way is technology. Sometimes an organization comes to me and they ask, what tool do I need to get to support this? But that's the whole thing. There's not one tool, right? There's so many tools that support the different steps in this in this process. You can do scenario planning, you can do strategy, breakdown and alignment. There are completely different tools. You can do all your BI, right? Your business intelligence with Tableau or Power BI or Vigier or Cruncher. You can collect very specific domain intelligence, like coming from recognition like work human or any other domain, sorry. And in the end, you also want your dashboards tracking on KPIs if your gap is closing or not. So there are so many different tools you probably use in this area. Questions about this one? This is just a complex picture of the same as the previous one. I will send a slide so you don't have to make, you can make pictures, but this is more in detail what you need to do in those different steps, right? And I also have a post on LinkedIn which talks about the pitfalls of strategic workforce management. So why are we not taking this seriously yet from an HR perspective? So then the voice of the employee. Right? If you want to listen to your employees, start listening, right? And the thing is, it's not one source. It never is, right? It's not one survey. It could be multiple surveys. We at AMRO had monthly surveys, quarterly surveys, yearly surveys. We had topic-related surveys, business unit-related surveys. But we also had a internal, the internal social platforms. And we also had this area, the digital area, where volunteers could come in and we could ask them questions, like 700, 800 volunteers. And that's more qualitative, but very useful. You could test things. How would you determine or articulate employee experience? What do you think defines it? Or do you like A or B? So it's a lot of interesting information. Microsoft Viva Copilot, all the Office 365 data is also very relevant to understand what people do. So what people think and people do could really help you to boost their experiences in your organization. So they could say they don't like a specific benefit, but if they use it almost 100% of all times, it's also a signal. So then transactional data, what people are doing in the organization is also very important. So you could use all that information. I'm not saying that you need to combine all the data all the time, but depending on what you want to know, you should be aware of the fact that you could combine those data sets and make more out of it, right? And then you just start deep diving, because starting listening gives you signals. It doesn't give you solutions. That's the second question always when management comes up to me. It's, oh, there's beautiful signals, very nice. So what is the solution? That's too quick, right? The signal is only telling you what people think or what's happening in the organization. So then you need to understand the problem, step 2. Love the problem, understand the problem. There are different ways to phrase it. And with qualitative research, panel discussions, interviewing, or reaching out to those who said, yes, you can call me after this survey. I'm happy to share my thoughts. All those sources can be used to have a better understanding of the problem. And then lastly, but not least, experiment. It's been said before, right? Try a solution. You don't know if it's perfect, but try it out. Maybe pilot it and learn from it. And then again, go back to the listening part and see if those complaints, suggestions, problems, voices disappear, or do they grow? So we had a big bubble chart where the bubbles in the graphs represented the topic. The bigger the bubble, the more people talked about it. The higher the bubble in the graph, the more positive people were about the topic. And the more to the left, it's a little bit more complicated, those people had a lower ENPS score on AB and AMRO as an employer. It's just a visualization, 2 by 2 bubbles. They move around from quarter to quarter, but it helps digesting a little bit what we've done with a lot of surveys. This was fully automatic. Based on one survey, we could only already do this. And it was also automatically with simple things like PowerPoint plugins. We could bring our, we could feed our PowerPoints that our HR managers take to the business. We could automate them coming directly from the dashboards, right? That's what everyone can do, by the way. But that's also powerful. So this is a rhythm, right? Continuous employee listening. And this is, well, hugely improved by large language models and the upcoming of AI, of course. We will talk about it in a second. So what is people analytics? I always have the urge to explain this. Who knows the wall of Boudreaux? Over here. I've heard of Boudreaux, professor in the US, who first came up with this first wall. And he meant that, okay, HR is very good in doing reporting, benchmarking, and surveys, but, oh, there should be a wall here, but not so good in answering questions like what if, or why are things happening. And here, it's data analysis on reporting, but here it's more data science work, right? It's more making models in Python or R and trying to find which skills are driving sales. Those are interesting questions, right? What leadership traits or capabilities are driving people to leave the organization or driving engagement? All those relational kind of questions that are a little bit more strategic than your questions over here, that's more in the area of predictive analytics. And the second wall, and I'm trying to pitch this one, is the wall of Coolen. That's me, but nobody's picking it up yet, so maybe you can talk about it on social media. But this is, I was a visionary. This is actually talking about, okay, you can do predictive analytics, but we did it one-off in many times, right? So we built a model, a statistical model, a machine learning model, and we saw some intelligence, and we told to our management team in a PowerPoint what we saw. But using the intelligence of those models and productizing that and bringing it to production as software is much more powerful. So we created vacancy recommendation, we built our own large language model assistants. So how would you also call this? packaged models in production. You could call it AI, right? So the biggest lesson, hopefully today, if you have a mature people analytic practice, you can build your own AI based on your own data sets. I love vendors. They are ahead of the curve. They have very good ideas, and they have very specific use cases. But I think it's good for an organization to have the option to make AI or to buy AI. Otherwise, you might end up with a vendor for every use case. That's also not what you want, right? So this is more a capability in terms of methodologies, statistics and machine learning, and here it's about scaling, right? And packaging and creating data products and bring them to production. Next slide, I will be quick because that's more, I don't know, the tools, the questions, and the roles that are involved. But don't think that your data analyst who is good in reporting can build models. Data science work, you need to study that for 3-4 years to be able to build statistical machine learning models. So a person who is good in Excel, which is, by the way, very important. So I'm not saying the one is better than the other, but I'm just making the argument that it's completely different. They both work with data, but they're not the same people, right? And on the right, to deploy your analytics, you have probably machine learning engineers and people like that. They work with different tools, they answer different questions, and this is the case. If your organization or your senior management is asking you a strategic question, what skills, well, the same example as earlier, what skills drive sales in our southern region, for instance, right? Then probably you need to do a little bit of descriptive. Maybe you have to send out a survey to collect some data, I don't know. You have to do some modeling, and in the end, maybe you're also going to deploy it as a dashboard or something else. So don't wait until your descriptive part is perfect, but start experimenting with predictive right away. It will also give you much more credibility in terms of strategic impact in your organization. So our first use case 10 years ago was within retail. It was, okay, what is driving from an HR perspective? Sales, client satisfaction, and the quality of work of our sales force. And I remember one thing we found is that the sales force, they had one role. There was no one who was good in all three of them. In sales, getting a high client satisfaction score, and being very good in quality of work. So they had two types of people. So they separated the roles, and from there on, those targets improved. So simple tests, it sounds like rocket science, but if you have one data scientist, you can do all these fun things. Another view number 5 already. And this one I like, but it's also maybe difficult to explain. This is what simply happens in HR, right? You start looking at your people needs, remember the cross in the beginning. You start looking at your business needs, you do some analysis, and then you have to prioritize. You bring in the trends from outside, you have to look at regulations, mandatory stuff, but in the end, you only have a budget of X and X number of people, so what are we going to work on? Then, if you decided to work on this, what solution are we going to do? Are we going to build or make or buy? And then implement it and evaluate it. It has some relationships with the strategic workforce management flow, but this is a flow that is simple, right? This is what happens, but people analytics and evidence-based HR is everywhere in all of these areas. So we're trying to write a paper now where we are not so much talking about the people analytics perspective of it, but the HR perspective. So where in your HR target operating model do you have to do evidence-based HR? So people needs, again, employee listening. Needs analysis, well, you have to have some people who can do analysis either from a descriptive or a predictive part. Solution design, well, maybe deployed analytics can play a role, right? Or AI. But your people analytic practice can be everywhere. AI. I was at so many conferences in the last half year. Everybody talked about AI. Nobody defined it. So it's not something magical, right, AI? It sounds like magic, but it's machine learning. It's machine learning modeling. And the idea of artificial intelligence being a robot, being able to help you with everything in the house or whatever, that's a very romantic image. We're not there yet. But the first things that we saw a computer or a system do is make calculations much quicker than we can. Excel, you could argue Excel is AI. If you look at the Cambridge definition of AI, Excel is AI. It's helping perform tasks that a human can do, but a computer can do better. PowerPoint, we can have a whole discussion, but I think it can also be labeled as AI. But the hype of the last 3 years, maybe, is those specific machine learning models that we call deep learning models. Deep learning models are algorithms that actually, and I'm exaggerating, nobody understands what's happening in there, but we do understand what we put in, and we understand the output. So it's wired like a brain. It has so many layers. It's very difficult and therefore also less transparent how these algorithms work. But you can validate the outcome. And a specific a subset of deep learning is what we call foundational models. So that's large language models where you can create generative AI. All the assistants everywhere in your HR organization, on every domain in HR, you could probably use AI. And also audio and video, where the deepfake happens, right? Which is not a good thing. But it's very powerful. And AI, I think the new thing about AI is that it is directly empowering the end user to engage with the intelligence. Instead of having to go to a dashboard, flipping a little bit with the filters, trying to understand how the data really looks, this is democratizing the use of intelligence, and that's very powerful in a very natural way. So you can talk, you can type. So I see a lot about upskilling in AI. I think if you really need to upskill on AI, the product is not good. Because these products are actually intended to be much more natural in their interface than the older software, right? So what you see in the last 3 years is deep learning, large language models, audio and video, all within the machine learning. And if you understand this, then my previous remark makes a lot of sense. You can build them yourself, if you want to, right? So, well, this is a lot of tools that's already within usage of HR. Probably you recognize a couple of them. And they all use AI, machine learning models. Some of them are really grounded in those machine learning models, and some, like SuccessFactors, they have in some tasks and functionalities, they use it, but maybe not everywhere. So probably you're already using it. Those were kind of 6 pictures. So the bigger picture, doing a step back, looking at your strategic workforce management part, the voice of the business, the voice of the employee, linking people analytics with artificial intelligence and having that, I would say, system look or target operating look, model look of HR and where evidence-based is applied. So my PhD is going to take ages because I have a full-time job, but it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I published my first paper in 23 at the end of the year. I'm going to share some of the insights first, and I'm finishing my second paper, only my second paper now, and I have to do 4. So it's going to take another 3 years, but it's very interesting. So the second paper, it's a little bit of a sneak preview, so it's not published yet, right? So the first paper was a literature review. So we looked at a lot of academic papers that talked about the adoption or institutionalization of people analytics in organizations and what factors drive the success, right? And we not only looked at workforce analytics papers, but we also looked at business analytic papers, so a little bit more, the more broader field of expertise of analytics. Why? They are a little bit ahead of the curve. So business analytics is already a little bit more institutionalized in organizations than people analytics. We call it workforce analytics, but we mean the same. So we thought, okay, if we want to learn how or which factors drive institutionalization, we also should look at business analytics. I've read 68 papers in the summer of 23, a lot of fun. This is a little bit of the distribution and the international footprint. And this is what we saw. And I'm not, maybe because of time, I'm not going to pick all of them. Just drop me a note. I can share the paper with you if you enjoy reading academic papers. Maybe a first thing that we saw is that HR is not so much applying analytics from an economic rationality, but because peers are doing it, or knowledge networks are doing it. Maybe a little bit the fear of missing out. And that's also related to what we see in practice, that sometimes it's also difficult for HR to make a business case on people analytics or any other services that we do in HR. So where business analytics is immediately drawn to the economic rationality and the opportunities. How can we make money? And I think people analytics has the same opportunity, but we don't always approach it like that. A data-driven culture is very important. It will help you, of course, institutionalize people analytics, but you can also influence a data-driven culture. You can also start building it. Or you can do upskilling. You can have leadership role modeling, peer-to-peer influencing, great product design. That's all helping in creating an evidence-based HR culture. The third bullet, extremely important. Everything you do in analytics needs to have a strategic alignment or a strategic fit. You only have limited resources, so spend them on the most impactful use cases in your organization. And connect them with business data, sales, client satisfaction, fraud detection, or whatever is important in your organization. Dynamic capabilities, also very important. What we mean with that is if you have that strategic question, it's hardly ever the case that you answer that question only by looking at a dashboard, or only doing a survey, or only doing a model. So the more impactful people analytic practices, combine those services. Just to be more efficient, quick, and also have a team that learns from each other and boost the maturity as a team. And it's a blend of skills. Maybe the last one on this slide that I mentioned. It's not only about data scientists, right? I hired a couple of data scientists, hardcore data scientists. They left within half a year. They enjoy big data sets and less, and maybe a little bit more hard data instead of people data. So I think, or I learned the hard way, that having that balance between behavioral science and data science is perfect. So the last 3 data scientists we hired were HR students who did a 2-year major in data analytics, or a similar combination. It's just one strategy, but it helped in our case. A little bit of a sneak preview of the second paper. So a lot of research has already been done about what factors drive a mature people analytic practice. But it's a little bit strange that nobody defined what is a mature people analytic practice. Actually, that's a big mistake, right? So we thought before we head on to my third paper and doing a large-scale survey, we need to have a more conceptual paper on what is institutionalization. So I talked to a lot of my peers, and that's where my benefit comes from being a practitioner. I could call them, and do you want to participate in my PhD? And they all say yes, so that's good. So I talked to 15 larger organizations across the globe and had a conversation with them. If people analytics is institutionalized in an organization, what proof do you see? What characteristics do you see? And then these come up. I have to say it's a little bit outdated, so I have 9 now, so I'm still writing the paper. But this is a first glance of it. So of course, coverage is important, right? So how many people use it? If you have a people analytics department only focusing on a subset of a business line, you could argue if it's institutionalized. And that is coverage of your organization. You can say the same for workforce topics. If you have a people analytics department that is only looking at recruitment cases and never at leadership, never at D&I, never at learning, you could also argue it's not maybe institutionalized in the full breadth of possibilities, right? Continued uses is important. So not a one-off. People should come back to you and ask about people analytics. And can you help me with this and this question? Routinization in behavior, processes, and infrastructure, a very important one. That's a little bit that target operating model picture that I talked about. Analytics and evidence-based HR should be routinized in all those steps. With tools, behavior, people should have that DNA. Strong alignment with strategy is the same as the previous, so a factor that is driving adoption could also be a characteristic, so it's coming back here. It should boost decision making. That was the biggest one. Everybody said, if you don't see an increase in decision making, stop doing it. That is the most important thing. And of course, there should be some user support, policies, training materials. Question?
Quality of decision making or also quantity?
I would say both. It's speed and quality, I would say. I think organizational dynamics determine that. But I think it's fair to say that we also need to make faster decisions in the dynamics that we have these days. But in essence, it's making better decisions. Better decisions with less degrees of uncertainty, right? That you're a little bit more certain than only looking at a number.
Stepping away from the gut feel, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But keep on using it, but put it in the mix of decision making, right? Acceptance and promotion, if you see senior management talking about it and promoting it, and we separated those two. So promotion is the 9th that I have now. Very important. And of course, your people analytic practice should be positioned not far away, reporting down to CHRO -4 or something, and should be one in size. No, it should have some substantial form to be able to act strategically, right? So I hope this also gives you a little bit from an academic point of view, the important characteristics of what is needed to build that evidence-based HR function. Question?
So this reflects what heads of people analytics say is important. Will you also ask, or have you also asked CEOs or CHROs how they would qualify successful analytics groups?
Excellent question. And
Thank you.
I forgot to tell. We interviewed multiple people. So we also interviewed the client side of analytics in organizations. So I bragged about my network of people analytic practices. So we interviewed them definitely, but we also interviewed the client view on people analytics. That's not a specific role. That depends on the organization who can answer those questions best. So we did a little bit of snowballing, asking in the organization who could think with us on this. Sometimes it's the CHRO, sometimes it's a business leader, sometimes it's an HR manager. It's a mix. So that's not always the same person in terms of role. But we did do a multi-stakeholder interview. Yeah. 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 All right, that concludes, I guess, my presentation. Thanks for listening. I'm not sure if we have time for another question, Q&A.
Yeah.
Happy to do so.
I have a question, but my wording will be off. Long day, sorry, and I'm trilingual. So, can you go one back?
Oh.
Sorry, no, maybe okay. Anyways, the results you showed. Yeah, so I'm curious to your findings, or maybe it's included into one of them. If we talk about the easiness or the ease to take risks, or the maybe linked to the boost of decision making. The culture of it's okay to fail, things like that. Could you also see that? Because I've seen that in our organization, but it hasn't been formulated as well as this. That when we started mapping the success results and the decision making, the boost, we did see that.
Yeah.
But we also saw that teams and people try to start new programs. They were more like they tried to start new things instead of, the fear of maybe I will fail or I will get fired or those things. So we saw a shift in the culture, but yet I had to have 4 or 5 parameters to show that, instead of having like, no, one that showed it all. So I don't have the holy grail there. But I'm wondering if you could see that in your conversations. Do I make sense? I'm sorry, it's a long day.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I'm just trying to rephrase it, maybe. So, is your question: is a culture where there's a risk-averse culture? Does that influence your analytic roadmap, or?
Yeah, it's more of the it's okay to fail, so therefore taking more risks and daring to do more.
I think building your people analytic practice is also subject to the dynamics you're talking about, like any other thing you want to implement. So if it's succession management, diversity and inclusion, whatever you want to do, if people don't want to take the risk, it's probably not going to happen, right? So that's a little bit of your senior management support, so your acceptance and promotion. But that's once you've institutionalized it. So if it's happening up front, there can be so many events that avoid you from implementing a practice. So one thing that we also see in the first paper is something called boundary spanning. So an analytical leader in this case, or your leader of D&I, or your leader of recruitment, being confident and being able to navigate those, the risk-averse people, talking to other types of people who have different opinions, who are really against it, and also learning from outside, going to conferences like this, or doing a PhD or whatever. But boundary spanning is helping navigate those insecurities that are in an organization. But I guess that's true for all domain implementation. So I'm not so sure if I gave a concise answer to your question, but any other questions?
Maybe more a comment, if we go into your first slide when you are talking about defining the gaps.
Yes, so that's the strategic workforce planning?
Yes, and at least my experience is the struggle for a lot of companies is to be clear on their strategy first and to be able to articulate it. So if my strategy is just like a very short PowerPoint presentation, which is not, so to say, been breaking down into concrete actions, then it's going to be very difficult to know what are the capabilities that I required from an organization perspective in order to reach my targets.
I completely agree.
And if this is not given, then how is it possible for HR to be a partner and to sit on the same table? I think this is, for me, one of the most important points, is to get HR as a business partner, not only like somebody doing recruiting, but from the beginning understanding the strategy, and maybe HR challenging that the strategy has to be more concrete in order to define what are the capabilities that are required in order to determine what are the gaps that we have in organization. Do we have the people that already are able to do the stuff? Do we have a people that we can push through a kind of learning program to get where we need to have them, or do we have to go for hiring? So if this is not given from the beginning, then it's going to be very tough to get to be having a given role. And when we look at the rise of AI, which is kind of moving much faster organization, the changes are much kind of shortened. When we see how much vendors are popping up in the market and making even through what we would say the timeline that we have to for a strategy is not anymore 5 years or 10 years. It's even sometimes less than 1 year in some environment. How to manage that volatility together with understanding the gap that I need to tackle in my workforce. Yeah? So what is your experience there?
Well, I could have said it in those words, right? When I explained this slide. So the macro design of your organization and your strategy, the first 2 steps, is the most difficult thing, right? Building a strategy, being very specific about it, being specific about, your organizational capabilities. If that's not happening, it's the same as the other example I gave. The first 2 times they asked me to do strategic workforce management and it ended up in reporting, then I said, okay, no, I'm not going to do it anymore. But the same happens with if they didn't have a clear strategy. I can't make a gap analysis or a sensible gap analysis if they don't have a clear strategy or not very good, well-articulated organizational capability. So then also you need to have the guts maybe to say, well, it's not specific enough. And that's not always accepted in the organization or in some organizations, but that's the only way to have a mature conversation on this, right? So macro design, extremely important to be very clear on it, otherwise it's not going to fly. And the micro, the last 3 steps, you'll manage, right? You have some data, you have some reports, it'll be fine. You have all the interventions already in place, probably, recruitment, learning, etc. But yeah, the most critical part, so I would agree with you, is the first 2 steps. And if it's not clear, don't start with strategic workforce management. Running out of time.
Yeah, shall we do it? Well, we've got one more. Oh, sneaky.
Is that allowed?
What you did there. Go on.
So I had one more question. Like, I loved what you said about the decision making, good decision making.
Yeah.
So how well embedded is, for example, in people analytics, the qualitative and the quantitative data? So how well is that crossed, or how do they manage that?
Well, it's very important, right, to do both. Like I said, if you are analyzing stuff, you get signals, not only from employees, but if you look at trends or look at benchmarks, those are signals. They're not telling you why things are happening. So why things are happening at scale, you could do predictive, but using semi-structured interviews, focus groups, and more qualitative approaches absolutely help. We also saw some nice examples on asking open questions. So normally with a closed questionnaire, do you like your direct manager? That's not a good question, but let's say that's the question. No, we immediately want to know why. Why is that so? If you ask open questions, you get a little bit more context and qualitative data that might already answer that questions and even come up with a solution. Fire him, for instance. But so you have a lot of ways of using a little bit more of qualitative data and contextual data. And I think it's very important before you move to the solution part. Otherwise, you're shooting from the hip. You're just seeing a signal and you start shooting. You have to understand what's happening, right? So I think it should be balanced. Yeah.
Cool. So thank you.
It's a wrap.
I think it's a wrap. So I think
Drinks?
we can do a clap. Thank you very much.